Over the past few weeks, George Russell has managed to stir quite a bit of controversy. The driver who's been seen as Mercedes' next big leader seems to be ruffling a few feathers. He's made some bold comments about other teams and drivers, which have only strengthened his ties with Mercedes. But during last weekend's Grand Prix, something happened that might have crossed the line. It looks like Russell prioritized his own interest over the competition, and in the process, he may have upset a few drivers. Things took a dramatic turn when he boldly declared himself the best driver on the grid. This raised some eyebrows, especially considering the tension that had been building. Was this a step too far? Could this backfire on him in the future? Has the way we view Russell changed after all this? Christian Horner, Red Bull's team principal, didn't hold back after the Qatar Grand Prix. He called out Russell for being over the top, and even a little pathetic during the weekend's events. The disagreement with Max Verstappen was intense, and it became clear that Max had lost all respect for George. Russell, who also happens to be the director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, found himself at the center of controversy after getting Verstappen penalized for allegedly driving too slowly during qualifying. Verstappen wasn't impressed with what he saw as a tactical move, both on the track and behind the scenes. This wasn't the first time George and Max had clashed. Last year during the sprint race in Azerbaijan, Verstappen was already irritated with Russell after a controversial move on the first lap. The situation escalated when Russell received a penalty for the incident. Verstappen was quick to confront George in the paddock, accusing him of trying to sabotage his race. "I've never seen anyone try to screw someone over like that," Max said, clearly frustrated. And it wasn't just the media who heard it. Max was vocal with George in person too. Ahead of the Qatar Grand Prix, there was yet another heated exchange between the two drivers. As reported by Kravitz, Max didn't hold back when he confronted Russell, apparently still fuming over the whole incident. Verstappen's message was clear. He wasn't happy with how Russell had played the game. According to Kravitz, Max used the argument to fuel his motivation for the race, hinting that George's actions had only made him more determined to perform well on race day. The exchange of words became so heated that Naomi Schiff, Kravitz's Skyphone colleague, even joked about not repeating Max's words, fearing she'd get into trouble with the FIA for potentially offensive language. But all jokes aside, the confrontation between the two drivers was intense. Despite all the drama, Max Verstappen went on to win the Qatar Grand Prix, securing his 9th victory of the season. But even after his win, the tension with George Russell didn't seem to subside. Max, who usually keeps a cool head, didn't hold back in his post-race comments. He admitted that he couldn't stand how Russell had acted, especially when it came to the penalty he received during qualifying. "The way he acted was completely ridiculous," Verstappen said, clearly frustrated. Max was even more upset when he spoke about the penalty in private. He claimed that Russell's behavior was completely out of line and that he had lost all respect for him after the way he handled the situation. "I can't stand that," Max added. He was still clearly seething about the whole incident, and the fact that George's actions had contributed to his penalty was something he couldn't just shake off. Even Red Bull's Christian Horner didn't mince words when discussing the penalty. He suggested that Russell had perhaps been a bit too eager to get Verstappen punished. "It was a very strange decision," Horner said. "Given the circumstances, it felt like Mercedes and George had blown it out of proportion. But Verstappen, in his typical fashion, didn't let the penalty get to him. He turned what could have been a disadvantage, starting from a lower grid position, into an advantage, making a strong start and quickly taking the lead in the race. As emotions ran high, there was still tension between Verstappen and Russell leading up to the start of Sunday's race. Horner mentioned that Verstappen wasn't thrilled with how things had played out, and that there was some obvious frustration bubbling beneath the surface. If you look at it objectively, you could argue that George was driving a little too quickly on a slow lap, which made things worse, he explained. Max, already fired up and motivated to win, had all the more reason to go after Russell once the lights went out. While Russell's move on the track had triggered a penalty for Verstappen, Max's competitive spirit only grew stronger. He converted his grid position into a solid start, quickly recovering from the penalty and turning what should have been a disadvantage into another victory. Verstappen had his eyes set on winning the race from the get-go, and that penalty only added fuel to the fire. Interestingly, Horner also suggested that Russell's actions could have been seen as part of a larger strategy, even if it didn't sit well with the others. There was a bit of gamesmanship going on, Horner said. This kind of rivalry wasn't new for these two, but the way it played out over the weekend was something else. In the aftermath of the race, George Russell seemed to realize that his actions might have stirred more trouble than he anticipated. Reflecting on his weekend, it became clear that his strategy had backfired. Not only had his rivalry with Verstappen intensified, but the fallout was growing. It seemed like he had inadvertently started a witch hunt against himself, drawing criticism from all sides. But Russell wasn't done. In a rather bold statement, he went even further, suggesting that he could have even won this year's World Championship if he had been in McLaren's car. He even hinted that he would have had no problem dealing with Max Verstappen in an equal car. Talk about confidence. I absolutely believe I could have won the World Championship in McLaren this year, George boldly claimed, sparking even more conversation. It was a statement that had fans and pundits alike questioning whether Russell was getting a bit too carried away with his own potential. And as for his role at Mercedes, he's already looking ahead. With Lewis Hamilton rumored to be moving to Ferrari next season, Russell is set to take on the team leadership. Lewis leaving doesn't really change anything for me, he said, exuding confidence. I've been in F1 for a few years now, and I'm ready to fight for the title. Now, while Russell's confidence in his own abilities is undeniable, the question remains, would he really have beaten Verstappen if they were in the same car? Max has dominated the sport in recent years, winning the last 4 titles with ease, and this season was no exception. He secured his 9th win of the season at the Qatar Grand Prix, comfortably holding off the challenge from McLaren and Lando Norris. It's clear that Max's dominance has been largely built on the consistency of his results, but Russell doesn't seem convinced that Verstappen's success is entirely down to his own brilliance. According to Russell, Max's title this season has been more about his rivals failing to capitalize on opportunities. He argued that while Verstappen has remained consistent, other teams, especially McLaren, have dropped the ball. When Max has had the chance, he's won, Russell pointed out. But the others, including McLaren, have lost valuable points this year. In Russell's eyes, it's the lack of consistency from McLaren and Lando Norris that has allowed Max to win the championship early. Russell also took the opportunity to point out that Mercedes has managed to take advantage of their chances when they've had them. Out of the 12 races where we were in a position to win, we took the best result possible in all of them except for Montreal, he said. When we've had the opportunity, we've capitalized. But here's the big question. Is it really true that Mercedes has made the most of every opportunity this season? Has Russell been able to take full advantage of the chances given to him, or is he simply looking for a way to explain away their shortcomings? The big claim here is that Russell believes he could have won the title if he'd been in the Red Bull. If I were in the Red Bull, I would have won, he said, referring to the car's early season speed advantage. But that's a bold statement, especially considering Verstappen's clear superiority in the second half of the season. Russell isn't shy about expressing his belief that Red Bull was the car to beat at the start of the season. Max won a lot early on, but it's only in the second half of the season that they became the third best team, he said. At the start, we had the chance to take pole positions, and we did it. We capitalized when we had the chance, and I don't think Max has had that level of competition this year. So, is Russell right? Would he really have beaten Max in a Red Bull? Or is he simply trying to paint a picture of missed opportunities to make himself look better? The confidence is certainly there, but it remains to be seen whether it's justified. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.